Hey guys, today we're going to go over the most popular meta decks in Lorcana. I'm T-Right Lorcana. I've been an avid TCG player over the last decade. I made it to the top 16 in the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh tournament ever held, consisting of 4,600 players, as well as topped countless regionals. I'm also consistently legend in Hearthstone. Now let's take a look at Lorcana. First up, let's talk about Agro, which are undeniably popular in Lorcana. Among the crowd favorites are the Rockstar Stitch variants, typically in the purple-yellow or gray-yellow. While these decks can be fun to play, I find them a bit inconsistent due to their heavy reliance on the Stitch mechanic. A more promising aggro deck option is the green-gray deck, which I like to call Mad Fairy Carpet Gru. It hits the board fast, building lore quickly, with cards like Flynn Rider and Cheshire Cat, and it keeps its foot on the gas by abusing A Whole New World and Beast Mirror. This deck is a force to be reckoned with, and with some fine-tuning is likely going to be an S-tier deck. Expect to see this one at your locals in the future. Here's the deck list. You're going to want to be playing 3 copies of Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician, 4 copies of Cheshire Cat, 4 copies of Kristoff, Official Ice Master, 2 copies of Genie on the Job, 4 copies Simba Future King, 4 copies Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, 3 copies of Duke of Wesselton, 4 copies of Hans Scheme Prince, and 3 copies of Han 13th in Line, 4 copies of Flynn Rider Charming Rogue, 4 copies of Cusco, Temperamental Emperor, 2 copies of Mother Gothel, Selfish Manipulator, 4 copies of Mad Hatter Gracious Host, 4 copies of Tinkerbell Most Helpful, 4 copies of A Whole New World, 3 copies of Mother Knows Best, and 4 copies of Beast's Mirror. This plays like every other aggro deck. You play your cards, turn them sideways, and your opponent gets punished for trying to remove them. Moving on to the mid-range decks, the gray-yellow and gray-purple options are the most popular choices. However, I believe the gray-yellow deck stands out as the better option. It focuses on efficient ways to handle your opponent's characters while deploying resilient characters on your side. And with Rapunzel and Stitch Carefree Surfer, it replenishes your hand consistently. But let's be real, mid-range decks might struggle against the top tier options. And had these 2 next decks not been such a good option, I think this deck would be very good. However, because it loses so hard to the best decks, I wouldn't advise playing it. But if you do want to play it, here's the deck list. We'll be playing 3 copies of Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, 4 copies of Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician, 3 copies of Hades Lord of the Underworld, 3 copies of Prince Eric Dashing and Brave, 4 copies of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, 4 copies of Simba Protective Cub, 3 copies of Krunk Right Hand Man, 4 copies of Ariel Spectacular Singer, 2 copies of Prince Philip Dragon Slayer, 4 copies of Hans 13th in Line, 4 copies of Rapunzel Gifted with Healing, 4 copies of Maximus Palace Horse, 3 copies of Puma Friendly Warthog, 3 copies of Stitch Carefree Surfer, 4 copies of Smash, 4 copies of Be Our Guest, and 4 copies of Grab Your Swords. Now let's go over the top contenders, which I like to call Flying Carpet Bomb and Daddy Issues Control. Flying Carpet Bomb is everyone's favorite blue-gray deck. The main strategy here is to ramp up your ink quickly and then unleash the power of A Whole New World to draw your heavy-hitting cards. This deck boasts strong removal options like Hades and Let It Go, alongside solid characters such as Kronk and Tinkerbell. However, it might suffer from consistency issues due to its reliance on drawing A Whole New World at the right time. And even when you do draw it, you're likely drawing 1 or 2 useless ramp cards at that point, while your opponent is going to be still drawing 7 useful cards. Still, it's a strong contender in competitive play and likely an S-tier deck. Here's the deck list. You'll be playing 4 copies of Robin Hood Unrivaled Archer, 4 copies of Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, 4 copies of Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician, 3 copies of Mickey Mouse Detective, 4 copies of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, 4 copies of Kronk Right Hand Man, 4 copies of Gramatala Storyteller, 4 copies of Mufasa King of the Pride Lands, 4 copies of Hades Infernal Simmer, 4 copies of Belle Strange But Special, 4 copies of Let It Go, 4 copies of One Jump Ahead, 4 copies of Grab Your Swords, 4 copies of A Whole New World, and 4 Beast's Mirror. Now brace yourself for the best of the best. My personal favorite, Daddy Issue Control. This is the red-purple deck featuring characters with rough upbringings like Maleficent, Aladdin, and Elsa. It is easily the best deck in the game. It excels at countering your opponent's early game with Aladdin, while providing ample removal options to handle those pesky blue ramp decks. The star card here is undoubtedly Be Prepared, and most will pack the deck with 4 copies. Additionally, this deck offers solid draw power to keep your hand full of threats. If you're looking to win every tournament you enter, you should be playing this deck. And here's my personal refined deck list. You're going to be playing 4 copies of Elsa Snow Queen, 4 copies of Maleficent Monstrous Dragon, 4 copies of Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, 4 copies of Donald Duck Boisterous Fowl, 4 copies of Dr. Philosopher Charlatan, 4 copies of Maleficent Sorceress, 1 copy of Gaston Arrogant Hunter, 4 copies of Aladdin Street Rat, 4 copies of Jafar Keeper of Secrets, 1 copy of Elsa Spirit of Winter, 4 copies of Stitch Abomination, 4 copies of the Queen Wicked and Vain, 2 copies of Ursula Power Hungry, 4 copies of Maui Hear It All, 2 copies of Dragonfire, 4 copies of Friends on the Other Side, 4 copies of Be Prepared, and 2 copies of Magic Mirror. That's all for today's rundown on the top Lorcana decks. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want to stay up to date with all things Lorcana, make sure to hit the subscribe. I'll be bringing you more news, best cards, and best decks in the future. Thanks for watching. See ya.